Welcome to the Raw Food Health Empowerment Podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Salmon, certified holistic health coach and author of You Can Afford to Be Healthy. And this podcast looks at a holistic approach to health from a multi-generational and multinational perspective of women of color. November is National Diabetes Month. According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, 34.2 million people in the United States, which is 10.5% of the country's population, has diabetes. Of them, 21% have not yet received a diagnosis. The CDC also estimates that 34.5% of people over 18 years of age, or 88 million people, have pre-diabetes. A study published this summer found that over the last decade, people with diabetes in the United States have become significantly less successful at controlling their blood sugar. In the United States, 90 to 95% of people with diabetes have type 2 diabetes, which is a reversible and preventable illness. If you or someone you know has type 2 diabetes, click on the link in the show notes to learn how you can use food as medicine to get your blood sugar under control and reverse type 2 diabetes. High blood sugar can cause cardiovascular disease and kidney disease, as well as problems with the nerves, eyes, and other organs. Diabetes can also lead to peripheral artery disease and other severe complications. I know this firsthand watching my grandmother graduate from testing her blood sugar daily as a type 2 diabetic and taking diabetes pills like metformin and Plavix and those things to having to take long injections of insulin into her stomach daily. We did all the things the doctor said to do, but she was not on the reversal diet that we now know is possible. This food as medicine strategy could have saved her life. There's no time like the present, so click the link in the show notes to get started. Welcome to the Raw Food Health Empowerment Podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Salmon, integrative nutrition coach. And today we have a special guest, Anuradha Kowtha, a catalyst, educator, and consultant who works with individuals, small businesses, and organizations to liberate their essence so they can meet these uncertain times with resilience and courage. Anuradha's journey working across both public and private sectors has led Anuradha to see systemic issues like hierarchy and exploitation and find ways to address systemic issues at their root cause. The thread that runs through Anuradha's work is illuminating and liberating individuals and small teams from the indoctrination and cookie cutter thinking that comes from capitalism and colonialism, so they can provide bold and innovative solutions rooted in justice to their clients and communities. Anuradha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Samantha. I'm really excited.
Yes, I'm excited to learn from you. So can you explain what ableism is and how it's different than disability justice, or is it different?
Well, I think it's similar, like there's a similar parallel that happens between racism and abolition. So, racism, talking about the overarching systemic, institutionalized, interpersonal, and internalized levels of how we've encoded race as, the kind of blocks that keep certain people from succeeding, racialized people from succeeding. Similarly, ableism is that kind of overarching, institutionalized, systemic, internalized, interpersonal things that happen that block people with disabilities and from making the progress, from having the changes, from having the rules and rights they deserve completely. Mm-hmm. But we don't see them as necessarily equal in our society. And similarly, how we would make that leap from racism to abolition is kind of speaking about it in a very specific way around in a US context. And certainly it pertains over here in Europe as well. Like a lot of Europeans, I'm going to call Europeans out that we think, oh, we don't have racism over here. Well, we are in fact doing the same things to people of color, mainly Black people, over here in a European context as well. So I just want to name that because a lot of people forget that it's a global struggle. Mm-hmm. And so similarly, the abolition is talking about that kind of school to, prison pipeline that we've created in the US and abroad. Similarly, disability justice is talking about it in a bigger sense, in a bigger scheme, right? What would it look like? So ableism is the kind of systemic kind of sets of rules and codes and laws that make it possible to do this. But we want to, like abolition, we want to remove it. We want to have disability justice. And I do want to say, not everyone in the neurodivergence who is not neurodiverse wants to be a part of the disability community or not. Like there is I don't know how to exactly put this, but not everyone agrees that they should have the same aims. And I think, because I'm in both camps, I am disabled, I have mental illness and trauma, as well as I'm neurodiverse. So I kind of think the aims are the same, but I can understand the reticence of people who are neurodiverse to not be lumped in with a disability, because in reality, I've been a teacher for many years in the classroom, and I rarely saw two people who are making meaning in the same way, processing information in the same way. Neurodiversity is not just, oh, we're all autistic. That is not the way neurodiversity works. So we might have, some people will argue the kind of outer margins of what would be included in neurodiversity would be like a trauma brain. So people who have trauma, especially complex trauma from an early age, or intergenerational trauma, I would argue, that affects the way we make meaning, the way we think, the way we formulate opinions, and so on, right? Our thinking, basically. And then some things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, giftedness, are certainly in the middle, right? Autism are certainly in the middle, like that is definitely neurodiversity. And so some people will say, oh, I don't want to be lumped in with disability activists, but I think the aims are often the same. What do we want? We want to be seen. We want to, right? Nothing for us without us, right? We want to be centered in how the laws are made. We want to be centered in how the policies are coming through. So everything stems from an actual disability lens, and because of capitalism, to be honest, how we contribute to society is definitely part of the mix. So our value is determined by how much we produce under capitalism. What's our labor good for? And because most care work is not considered, capitalism needs care work. Capitalism would crumble if we didn't have the care work happening to not only caring for people with disabilities, but children, or,
elderly.
Yeah, elderly, yes. Even home care activities like cooking and cleaning and stuff. Capitalism couldn't survive without all that care work, yet it doesn't want to pay for that labor. And so we minimize the importance of such labor. And sometimes people with disabilities can't do much or perform, or, and I'm saying all these in quotes, produce under capitalism, yet they provide really important things in our society.
Yeah. I like what you said, just making that clear that, folks don't want to be bundled up in the definition, like, because we all have, I guess, choice in like how we choose to identify. My excitement for this whole conversation is really like, because I personally have never had folks with disabilities in my immediate family. It was never really at the forefront of my mind. But when I've heard, a speaker talk about disability justice and neurodistinctiveness, and with the understanding that it came out of that need to support folks with autism and really connect them to the economy and have them feel supported in that, I felt like everything that was being said is how I feel, and I'm not autistic, right? I'm not autistic. I don't consider myself as someone with a disability, but I feel like the way in which we do work in this country, specifically in America, is incongruent with the human body. It is not healthy. And it's like we're in a time right now where humans are being, I guess, pit against machines to see who can work harder to produce more. And obviously humans are going to lose this battle, right? So it's like we're chasing ourselves to death, and centering, having this conversation and focusing our efforts on folks with disabilities and connecting them to the economy to make sure that they can financially sustain themselves, really helps all of us win. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why I want to talk about this more. I want to amplify this messaging and get people, because I know these terms and a lot of these conversations are happening in pockets on universities and nonprofits and things, but most of society is not hearing this. And we could all benefit, especially folks who are interested in health and wellness, because what we are talking about is if we make the workplace, conducive to folks with neurodistinctiveness, which, I mean, maybe you can school me on the exact definition, but based off of what I've heard you say so far, just like how we have different fingerprints, the way we think and process information, the way our brains work is also very unique and different. And that makes sense to me from a nutrition standpoint, because our brains are affected by our microbiome, and our microbiome is very distinct. It's as distinct as our fingerprints. So from the nutrition aspect, that totally makes sense to me. And I feel like, as we talk about making the workspace more conducive to folks with neurodistinctiveness, this actually moving this forward behooves all of us who actually are concerned about wellness in the workspace. So how can that, if you could talk more about the benefits of that and like how it's more broad reaching in like some of the things that are being asked?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I could go in so many directions. And as I said earlier, I'm neurodiverse, so I can see like interesting angles branching out here. But one of the things I think about with a natural place of solidarity we can build between the workforce or labor in general and disabilities is, like you said, when we create new technology, oftentimes it is not at the benefit of the workers, of labor itself. So, we have these, checkout scanners at the library or at the, at the grocery store. And instead of, hey, if some people use these machines, that cuts down on labor for all of us. And it's actually, some people don't want to interact talking to a checkout person. They can now do it on their own. And certainly that's helped to me in the past, where I felt like talking is not going to be a good way for me to proceed for the day. So instead of these machines being around, of, saving the labor force actually having to do the checkout process, or one person could be there to monitor several checkout machines, and then being able to be nonverbal and check out. And we can look at like a Karl Marx term, which is primitive accumulation. So what happens is these companies will use, so instead of, how can I explain this? So basically, primitive accumulation is basically you profiting on the labor of other people. So it's not of you doing your own hard work and you making some money from that labor or service or whatever it might be, product, and then you keep the extra. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying these CEOs are instead using this labor saving device and then and taking all the money, the extra money created from the labor force, and then they are pocketing that. And we see that happening, the money getting funneled up to the 1% and not being there for labor unions or the labor force, So
Mhm.
what a better way to imagine that same scenario would be, we go to the checkout, and then everybody who's on staff, nobody gets fired, but instead we can say, oh, we've saved some labor from this machine. Maybe we can all work 4-day weeks and get paid the same amount instead of a 5-day week. I mean, for instance, that's a way we can be in solidarity, right? So
Yeah.
that helps people with disabilities because, hey, this machine is a little bit more accessible. Maybe people don't like, hey, I can watch 6 checkout stations instead of 1. It's maybe a little less work for me. And in the UK, they allow people at the checkout registers to sit, which I think is amazing. So we can make things adaptable and accommodate these individuals,
Mhm.
but it not only just helps people with disabilities, but it helps everybody. It helps just the entire workforce.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, like even that, the 4-day work week, right, is something I'm thinking about, reading about, and talking about a lot, because I find that the 5-day work week, 40-hour week, which is minimum, most people are working way more hours in America, at least. And like I said, it's a race to the bottom, because folks are burnt out, they're stressed, especially, with everything happening politically over the past 4 years, but definitely over the past 2 years with the pandemic and, racial tension just reaching another peak. We've been through this many times in the past. But the intensity is really strong right now. So stress and burnout is at an all-time high. And something as simple as like the 4-day work week, and it seems simple, but it's like even what you just said about a company having the opportunity to cut cost, but instead funneling that money into the labor force. So not like, which would still be a benefit for them because it's still a write-off for them, but just wouldn't be profit, I guess, for the shareholders to to reap their benefits.
Yeah,
So it's like,
absolutely.
I wonder if you personally have a plan, because I know your organization works with companies. So how exactly are you helping companies make the workplace more conducive for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do want to say a caveat to what you just said. And this was a court case from, I think, the Ford guy, I think Henry Ford, actually took them to court saying, why can't we redistribute this money, basically? And it was ruled that certain, especially corporations in particular, have to have that money go back to shareholders. So that's what is driving the force. So not picking a certain type of corporation as your structure might be a good start. But if you're
That is
already in that
excellent.
position, there's other ways to start mitigating that, I think. So I just want to say it really depends on your legal structure. According to law, you have to follow that.
Yeah.
So, so it depends. If you're already really well defined. So most of my companies aren't corporations. So, we don't have that specific issue, but it could be a matter of setting up your company here in the UK, you would call them community interest groups or a nonprofit, so you can change the structure a little bit. And you can also have cooperatives. Like there's a lot of cooperative banks, credit union is a great example. The owners of the bank are the people who are buying in, being members. And so then they can reap the reward in terms of lower interest rates on mortgages or things like that, other financial products the bank might offer. So so look at your model. We might look at that. We might look at how your profit structure is. I mean, for little businesses, even to really big businesses, the use of profit first. It's a book written by Mike Michalowicz.
Yeah.
And I adapt it heavily, and I would suggest anybody who's using profit first, first start making your account, start, on every deposit, making sure that you are paying yourself, paying your employees. But you can start to play with, what do I do with that extra? How can I make sure I have enough to give to the causes that I really want? We can in our company, for instance, we often invest in, mutual aid efforts. So we'll find projects that are doing good on the groundwork. Since my ancestry is from India, I'm often looking at projects there. So we're supporting Arthi Nayak, and she does work in the slums of Mumbai to make sure girls are getting an education where they would otherwise not have access to an education, or in during the pandemic, food and other supplies. So, so you can find causes that are not just charities, because charities often have that stigma and they have a similar structure. Like, look at UNICEF's structure. Very little goes into what they say they're doing. Most of it actually goes to the 6-figure, 7-figure salaries for the CEO and the, so, really do your due diligence. Yeah.
Wow.
So we think, oh, it's just a charity, it's a good thing. But, actually looking at that, we can look at, are we investing in disabled business owners, Black, Indigenous, people of color owned businesses, queer owned businesses? Like, so can you start to move some of your income and some of your supply chain into supporting these companies?
Yeah.
So like, if you have if it's a white owned company and it's most of your supply chain is white business owners from the global north, can you start thinking about, hey, what are things that I want to invest in, or who are people that projects I'm really inspired by that I can start to consciously put money into? And then it's win-win. So we might look at things like that. And then, of course, accessibility. Oh my gosh, I could speak hours on the accessibility, what we can do to make our work more accessible.
Well, when you say accessibility, I think like historically, traditionally, we always think about, the sidewalks, making sure those are clear and stuff like that. But now the conversation is focused around remote work, which a lot of companies weren't really trying to do, but now there's more and more remote work available, which, like I said, I love, I've had even episodes on here talking about remote work. I love remote work because when it comes to especially Black women, and I don't think that when we have this conversation about Black women that we're thinking so much about disability, but the stress levels that they're dealing with in the workspace, like I've heard from Black women that they feel it's not psychologically safe. And because of all of what you said earlier about, trauma, generational trauma, even if we personally have not experienced racism, we could be triggered by certain comments or terms that we feel is racist or has an undertone of some kind of racism or even sexism or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So being able to have the opportunity to create your own space so you can keep that psychological safety, keep that joy and stuff, which actually helps us work better, So this is not, I feel like, I'm just so grateful for the folks who are raising this, for the folks in that community, in the disability community, in the, or the disability justice and the neurodistinctive group for raising these things, because other folks who have been raising them, it hasn't been enough to move the ball forward. And I feel like maybe this might be it, because we see that we really can do better and it will help everybody. It will help everybody. So when you talk about access, besides remote work, like what are the other things that companies could be doing to make work more accessible?
I was going to say, do you have 10 hours? But we'll there's so many things we can do. First, I do want to respond to your comment about that Black women in particular. I haven't seen any studies about Black women, but certainly people of color studies based in the UK. There has been a number of studies showing that, and some that have come out of the US, that workers actually, the Black, Indigenous, people of color, or here in the UK, they use the term BAME, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, for various reasons. They use a different term here. And that they are reticent to go back to working in the office because they got to then have a side of life where they didn't have to deal with microaggressions all the time. And so that's a thing. And a fairly recent study showed people with kind of foreign sounding last names here in the UK, they had to apply for 75% more jobs to get hired.
Wow.
So, there's so many things that you wouldn't think make life more difficult. So yes, remote working solves some of that. As far as the names go, having a kind of blind process, like where you hide the names of the applicants through the application process. And there are ways you can do that, especially for bigger companies. They have that technology, but you can actually say that. You can actually, an interview I did for The Future is Accessible, which is a recent event I did. One of the people who was a trans woman here in the UK, she was saying one of the things she did in the application process to make it super easy was, she basically gave a document with, this is what the kind of information we're looking for. It's like you give the cheat sheet, almost like make it easy for people. Don't make it super difficult, right? In my intake process for this is not for hiring people, but in my intake process, I allow people to submit things in any file format they want. So if they want to do a video, if they want to do a poem, if they want to do, write in their journal and take a photo of their journal and send it to me, that's fine. I just need this kind of thing. So how are we thinking when we're making decisions? So it really comes down to that. So some accessibility. So what I would suggest is, instead of me giving you a list, like do all of these things and then you're good, that's in fact backwards in my opinion. I mean, I can always, right, as a consultant, I go in and give specific targeted advice to people. What I would say, if you're starting this journey, where, in whatever business, whatever field you're in, 1 out of 5 people in the UK, and I'm sure this is a global statistic, is disabled. 1 out of 5 people has mental health stuff going on. The millennials, Gen Z, is saying 1 out of 5 of them identify as trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming. So people are already in your space using your products, on your teams, most likely, on your Twitter, wherever they're hanging out, they're already there. Whether they're actually publicly saying so to you is a totally different thing. So are you making it safe for them to say that first? And then are you actually curious to hear what they're saying, so you can set up focus groups? Or it could be a lot less, like an idea I had recently is, say like you wanted to see the accessibility on your website. Well, give like offer to pay for an Amazon gift card or something else, pick a more ethical company, if you will, but, or give a free service of what you already offer, and say, hey, can you look at my website and give me honest to goodness feedback about what we're saying? Like, does it make sense? You know what I mean? Like, people in your community already have ideas of what you could be doing better. The question is, are we listening? Are we tuned in? Are we relating? Because if we're talking about capitalism as this transactional approach, then the kind of opposite of that is becoming relational in our approach. So slowing down to the pace of the conversation. And especially when we're talking about chronically ill people, they're not going to have unlimited spoons, right? Unlimited energy capacity to do that. So, if you're actually listening, so if you're seeing that, wow, there's a lot more gender nonconforming people than I thought, can you then go think, and of course, I don't think in a linear way. So I think in a web kind of way. Where are all the places that you have an intake form that are you allowing place for pronouns? Are you putting your pronouns places? Are you making it easy? Like, I see a lot of doctor or medical forms, and they don't even acknowledge other genders. So it makes it really difficult for people. So do they risk coming out or not? That there are a lot of forms that insist you put Mr. or Mrs. or mix or, whatever. What if people don't want to, what if they don't want an honorific? So there's like, do you see with gender, we can do that. We can play a lot and think, oh, where are all the places where I can start feeling that? And then see where that maybe happens. And then when we think about onboarding a new employee, do we have a healthcare plan that supports them through any surgeries through, if we're thinking about various sexualities, is partner only defined as a hetero couple and everybody else is not covered, right? So, is it a safe workplace for people to speak about such things? Could they be transitioning and that's going to be okay? Or are people not going to recognize that and then continue to misgender them? Or, oh, we can't talk about same-sex partners, so, because of the stigma. So people are going to be more quiet about what they're doing outside of office. So it's things like this you really want to be thinking about. They need to infiltrate the culture. It can't just be this superficial, okay, we have a tick box, we're good. We put a pronoun box on our form, we're fine with gender. That's really not how it works, right? If we're really going to think about gender or race or any of these things, and what I would say is don't try to attempt too many, right? If you're going to be working on your gender piece, then maybe leave some of the other pieces for the moment and put out a statement. Hey, those are important to us. We're going to continue to sharpen the saw, but right now we're working specifically on where we are right now.
I like the point you mentioned about calling people in, right? Because they're in your community. How exactly does one do that? Like, how does a small business call in their community and say, hey, we want to know how we're doing in this area? Like when you were talking about accessibility for the website, it's just a simple email asking them. Is it that simple?
It could be, but I would prefer an ongoing conversation. I mean, think about how frustrated, I don't know what it's like in the US, but certainly it's been global since the George Floyd protests really were global and really brought a lot of white people to say, oh, I need to be thinking about this maybe for the first time. And here in the UK, we're at least 2 decades behind you all in a race discussion. So, so a lot of companies approached me, or you see the companies putting the black square or maybe putting an anti-racism statement out on their website. And yet then the momentum's lost within a few months. Even the sentiment in the US, by the time September rolled around, so last September, we're talking here, 2020, the interest and the support for that from especially the white demographics was waning. So how would you want to be approached? I'm making another parallel here, that how I would like to be approached as a person of color. I don't want people to be virtue signaling to me. I don't want fake allies. Certainly that makes my life more difficult. So when I see companies who are now cottoning on to, oh, I need to have, diverse images. I'm going to have a fat person. I'm going to have a black person. I'm going to, are they really actually doing the ethic, or did they just pick some pictures? Did they just download someone's anti-racist thing and put it on their website? So the thing is, what I would say, especially if that is a learning edge for you and you haven't put anything out about it, is to work in concentric circles, work where you're really confident. So some people are really confident in certain areas. I'm sure, and I've heard you speak, about your Blackness and, your hair journey and so on. So it seems like you're already comfortable with that. So then maybe, oh, I want to add disability and neurodivergence to the conversation. So you just start using signals, right? Using words, but not in a, and it's hard for me to say, is it performative or not, but to be, if someone brings it up once and never talks about it again, I'm like, okay, right? So if you're continuously talking about it, if you're platforming people who are outwardly neurodivergent and disabled, that's going to send a signal. If you're going to be talking about issues that center disability justice, that's going to send signals. So it's like, how do we want to be treated as people of color, by white people? I don't want to get waylaid and right. Like, oh, is this a fake kind of allyship? Are they really doing it? Or are they just doing it because now it's popular to do it?
Yeah, which I think is this makes sense to me. At the same time, I'm not one of those, just me personally, I'm not one of those people who call out other companies, because I don't focus on those companies so closely to even call them out, because I don't notice, So it's like I know there's this one a woman, a Black vegan woman, who that's her platform, where she's calling out some companies. And it's really interesting because I was like, word, I did not know that company was doing XYZ, whatever, because I'm not focused on them. I'm so focused on my mission, you know. But what really spoke to me, what you said, is like, even in going towards my mission, which people understand and know, there are intersections that I haven't been paying attention to, where, like you said, the concentric circles, where's that intersection of folks who are on their type 2 diabetes journey, on their obesity journey, interested in health and wellness, but they're dealing with a disability. How do they maneuver in the kitchen to make this lifestyle work, and things like that? Having those types of conversations, which, you know, I would need one-on-one conversations with those people to kind of to meet them where they are, to figure out and game plan with them, like how that could work, because I don't even have a vision, an understanding, you know, of what life is like, because I have no examples in my circle. So from framing it that way and kind of seeing and understanding that way, that makes it really clear. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. In terms of a policy conversation, because I'm really into food policy and making system-wide change, and it goes the same for companies and nonprofits, large organizations. You know, in order for anything to really create change, it has to be concretized in some kind of policy across the board. In terms of a company and in terms of the government, and I know you're coming from UK, but UK is so similar to America. So like, what do you think is needed to really move this movement forward, to center folks with neurodiversity and disability in these types of conversations?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, you know, as a whole, the wellness industry has a lot to say for itself, because oftentimes I see in the wellness industry in general, I'm not saying you specifically here, but, you know, we see a lot of spiritual bypass. We see a lot of ableism inadvertently. So I kind of shy away from companies like that, you know, and I believed it for a long time. I believed, oh, if I just do this or eat this, then I'm going to feel better. And in fact, that's not necessarily true. And as you said, it's not accessible for everyone either, right? There's people who, like my partner is disabled and is visually impaired. So, you know, grocery shopping is very different. Or if people are a wheelchair user and they're in the grocery store, they maybe can't reach things on the higher shelves. So what they're limited by is what they can reach. So, you know, it really makes things way more challenging, right? And so when we make room for one person, i.e., making sure there's room for a wheelchair user to use, we inadvertently make room for people who are carrying luggage or bags or have strollers. You know, we make space for other people. So it's this concentric circle thing maybe has way more impact than you might think. Oh, I think it's only going to make it safer for wheelchair users. But in reality, I've made my space safer for fat people, for parents with young kids who have, you know, strollers or stuff like that. So, you know, so that kind of policy. So I guess when we're thinking policy for me, I think policy writing can be paradigm shifting for a company. Now, sometimes it's a good statement. I think when I'm working with companies, I might suggest, hey, who are you learning from? What are trainings you've taken? Right. So to kind of list this. So that's a good place to start. Say, this is our learning edge, and just name it, right? I wish some companies would just say, you know what, we're looking at ableism and we don't know a whole lot about it. And for them to say that we're kind of, you know, that's what we're working on, right? I think it can be that way. But when I'm thinking about policy change, and these are kind of superficial in my mind, I'm getting to the root, right? The kind of paradigm shifting piece is, if we all knew that our health was temporary, because that's in effect, like ableism is frightening. because we can't control it. We don't know when it's going to happen. And so that terrifying fear of death and feeling lack of control around the fact that we die as humans, and that there is a right, and that our society only kind of focuses on youngsters like 20 to 35, and then you don't exist in the scheme anymore, right? So it's like this fear of death in so many ways. So what I think a really kind of paradigm shifting to, to look at our own humanity, to look at, hey, what if I was confined to a bed, or, and and I'd still want dignity of life, right? So what policies would happen if that was your new way of thinking, instead of, oh, I'm going to avoid getting older, looking older. I want to still have productivity. Right? So it's a very different paradigm we're living in. So if we're writing our policy statement from, okay, my wellness is wellness to make sure we continue to function within a capitalist system, that's not really revolutionary, in my opinion. It's necessary, but it's not changing anything, right? It's going to keep the status quo. But this other model really gives us scope to say, we can look at the paradigms on which our company was actually founded. And can we have wellness, like Hayes, health at every size, right? That's a really important set of documents they're creating there about how can we, not everyone agrees with that from physicians and so on, but it's a revolutionary way to look at dieting and wellness and say, hey, no matter your size, you deserve respect, you deserve, and you can be healthy. And studies actually support this. It's the ableism that doesn't allow fat people, or, fat phobia, it kind of penetrates the whole market. So then people go to their doctor, and then until you lose weight, we're not going to do anything. And when their health condition has nothing to do with their weight. So it not only is it grounded in science to do these things, right? To not discount huge swaths of the population. It embraces our own unique humanity, and chances are it's your team, your customers, it's a lot of people would benefit from such a thing. So I know I'm kind of speaking generally, but, we really need to look at the actual boulders that are in our way. And with capitalism being such a boulder, it's like, hey, can I stop dehumanizing? Because that's what capitalism does. You're not a human, you don't produce, you don't matter. And central to almost every movement, we're all saying the same thing. We do matter, right? We, people who with disabilities, with neurodivergence matter, and their needs matter. It's not just because it's good for business. It's because, hey, that's embraced, because you are me, I am you. Like, I don't know, but I don't want to be spiritual or bypassy about it, but I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it's like a more of a compassionate economy, which I don't think there's sustainability in our whole system if we don't do this. Because like I said, we can't compete with machines,
Yes.
and I'm going to have a link actually in the show notes to Andrew Yang's book, The War on Normal People. I don't know if you've read his book at all, but he basically talks about how machines are taking over basically all the industries. And what can we do? Because this is going to have colossal effects on families, and our ability to financially, not only just take care of ourselves, but not just, struggle to get by, basically. And so, yeah, so it's really interesting. Like everything you're saying, this whole concept is tied into so much for literally all of us. Like it affects every single one of us. So it's a really important conversation. And we could talk forever, but I really want to learn more about your program, the Future is Accessible training course that you have for small businesses and nonprofits. So tell me about this program. Who should sign up and what will they learn?
To answer your other question is join a union, do these kinds of things that builds solidarity, right? So do that kind of solidarity building work, and onto the future is accessible. It's actually, it's 10 hours or so of interviews where I interviewed people from different industries, different sectors, different points of view. And we're talking about, so we have someone talking about anti-racism, we have somebody talking about parental or caregiving accessibility, so it's really rich conversations. As I mentioned, we had someone talking about gender, a trans woman talking about from the perspective of someone actually hiring for gender services here in the UK. We have a variety of perspectives. And what I'm working to do is to create a training out of it. So not only do you get access to these 10 calls, there's going to be 4 live calls where we actually focus on 4 areas in your business, including your hiring process, your social and environmental responsibility, your HR, things like that, that are your culture. So the 4 areas that every company is going to have, whether you're doing it by yourself or it's a bigger organization, there's something to talk about. So normally it's geared towards people with teams of 1 to 5. And we have, so besides this kind of library of resources, there's a number of resources, we're going to have live time to speak once. It's an 8-week class. So we can actually dive into, hey, what are the changes I can make appropriate for me right now? And also in the future, right? Because we get hung up, oh, I want to fix it all today. And that's really nice. I'm not saying don't do that, but you mentioned sustainability, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't sustainably do everything at once. We don't often have the budgets to do it. It takes a lot of, it's kind of like pulling up weeds, right? We have to do a lot of internal work as a team as well. Like, oh, I didn't realize I was upholding so many, transphobic ideas or ableist ideas, right? We really have to confront ourselves, and we need to come together as a team to say, what will we do about it? What is our real culture? So we give space for that kind of conversation to develop. And then what can we do now? What is kind of low hanging fruit for us to accomplish now? What's in our sights? And then what would we like to be setting up? Like one of the things we have with a course I teach, Sowing Post-Capitalist Seeds, at the beginning, we didn't really think that much about accessibility. We made it price accessible, but we really didn't think that much through. And then after the first time we started teaching it, we brought in, closed captioning. We brought in some, we have this time a global South pricing. So people who want to take our course from like South Africa or India or places like that, where the exchange rate just doesn't work in their favor, they couldn't take the class. So we said, okay, well, we can now make it so they can pay what you can, which is a significant amount for them. And we have a higher tiers that if people cover at that rate, then we can afford to bring in people who maybe want to take the course from the global South. And then one of the ideas we want to grow on in the future is we want to have a bursary. So we have 2 people of color scholarships, but in the future, I want to have a bursary or a stipend available so that we can pay someone to take the class, because that actually might be the best way for them to take it. That meaning for them to take the class, they have to stop doing paid employment that they need the money for. So this way they can focus on the class and get paid to take it. So, like we didn't think of that the first time. That wasn't when we set out to do the course. We just wanted to offer an awesome course, but we slowly added a section with, we brought in some outside speakers. We kind of iterated within that circle. We kind of kept going and then going to each outer concentric circle. So that's what I would invite people to do in this class. Hey, where are we today? Let's take honest stock of where we are and make some decisions. And then that changes the trajectory, saying that we're now price accessible. Now there's more people who are interested to take it and be a part of it. And actually a number of our people who've taken the class are now taking that price accessibility and changing and doing something else with it in their own classes. So they're making their work more accessible. And they're really thinking about their pricing, for instance. So it's like we can actually create a lot of movement from making these political choices. Because, I don't want to confuse people that is this activism. No, it's a political choice that we're making, that not everyone can afford the class, and how can we, that's a decision we're making. We want to be accessible in that way. So, we will give you space to make decisions for your company to say, this is what we stand for. And based on the back end of that decision, what are the implications?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. And thank you so much for like organizing our minds around this, because this is new and it's a lot. It's a lot for some people, especially if you're not working in the space of, nonprofit work, community development work, justice work, or you're not even connected to, the disability community in that way. All of this just feels very new. So how can folks like find you online and connect to your services? We're definitely going to have a link to that program that you just talked about, the Future is Accessible training course. And how else can folks reach out to you?
Yeah, I think I'm basically at Anuradha Kowtha, just like my name, or at the Kowtha Constellation on most platforms. And you're welcome to send me a message, send me an email, and I'd love to, I'd love to hear from people. So if you have a question, let me know.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to have the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Anuradha, for educating us all today.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate it.